He came to help his friend's mother sort a dusty workshop. But when her hand found his, and she whispered his name, he realized some connections defy every rule. The ancient Honda Civic, a metallic relic that had faithfully served Callum Rourke through 4 years of university and countless road trips, finally shuddered to a wheezing halt. It wasn't a gentle surrender. It was a defiant, shuddering collapse, its engine coughing a final, rasping protest as Callum coasted into the sprawling, unkempt driveway of the Briarcliff estate. A plume of fine ochre dust erupted from beneath the tires, momentarily obscuring the faded grandeur of the sprawling Victorian house. Callum, at 22, was all long limbs and quiet earnestness, his dark, unruly hair perpetually falling across his brow. He was a mechanical engineering student, more accustomed to the sterile hum of a laboratory than the musty scent of forgotten history, but he had promised Lachlan Thorne, his roommate and oldest friend, that he'd lend a hand. Lachlan, perpetually swamped with his architectural thesis, had sent a desperate plea. "Callum, mate, Mum's drowning in Granddad's workshop. Please, just a few hours. I owe you big." And Callum, true to his nature, had agreed. The Briarcliff estate, nestled deep within the Willow Creek Valley, felt like a forgotten world. Its once manicured gardens had succumbed to wild abandon, a riot of untamed roses and sprawling ivy, and the vibrant teal paint of the house now peeled in brittle, sun-bleached flakes. A pervasive sense of quiet sorrow hung in the humid summer air, a stark contrast to the buzzing, hurried pace of Callum's life in New Haven. He cut the sputtering engine, and the abrupt silence that followed was immense, broken only by the insistent chirping of crickets and the distant, mournful caw of a crow. He took a deep, fortifying breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something subtly sweet and melancholic, like dried lavender and old paper. He unlatched the rusty iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and walked towards the side entrance, where Lachlan had indicated the workshop was located. He lifted his hand and rapped his knuckles against the weathered oak door, its surface pocked and scarred from years of exposure to the elements. The sound was surprisingly dull, absorbed by the thick wood. No answer. He tried again, louder this time, a persistent, rhythmic thud. Still nothing. He paused, then pushed the door gently. To his surprise, it yielded with a long, drawn-out groan, revealing a cavernous space swallowed by shadows, dimly illuminated by a single naked bulb dangling precariously from the high ceiling. The workshop was a bewildering tableau of chaos. Wooden planks leaned haphazardly against walls, half-finished carvings lay abandoned on workbenches, and countless boxes, overflowing with untold treasures and forgotten junk, were stacked precariously, threatening to topple with the slightest tremor. The sheer volume of accumulated life, of unfinished projects and cherished tools, was overwhelming, a tangible monument to a life once lived. "Hello?" Callum's voice, a little too loud in the echoing space, bounced off the high rafters. "Mrs. Thorne, it's Callum Rourke, Lachlan's friend." A faint rustle, a startled gasp came from behind a towering stack of canvases, draped in a thin layer of dust. Then a figure emerged, silhouetted against a sliver of weak sunlight that managed to penetrate a grimy windowpane. It was Alara Thorne. Lachlan, in his casual way, always just called her Mum, but Callum knew her full name from the handful of polite, formal encounters they'd had over the years. Even in the gloom and disarray, she was strikingly beautiful. Her dark hair, rich with threads of silver, was pulled back in a loose, somewhat disheveled bun, and her slender frame was enveloped in an oversized, paint-splattered canvas apron. Her eyes, the color of warm, aged honey, held a profound depth of sadness that Callum had always noticed, a quiet grief he instinctively knew not to probe. She couldn't have been more than 42 or 43, and the stark contrast between her inherent grace and the desolate, dust-laden surroundings was unsettling, almost heartbreaking. "Callum, oh my goodness, I completely forgot you were coming today," Alara said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried clearly through the vast space. A faint flush, a delicate rose hue, spread across her pale cheeks. She looked flustered, her hands fluttering uncertainly before she clasped them together, as if to anchor herself. I was looking for something. A specific chisel, my father's. He had so many, and now I can't find the one that matters. Her gaze drifted around the chaotic room, a hint of desperation in her eyes, as if the sheer volume of her father's legacy was suffocating her. Lachlan asked me to come help, Callum replied, feeling a familiar awkwardness prickle at him. He always felt this way around Alara. She exuded an aura of refined sorrow, a quiet dignity that made him feel clumsy, inexperienced, like a boy suddenly thrust into the presence of something ancient and fragile. He said you were having trouble sorting everything out. Trouble is an understatement, Callum, she said with a small, wry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a fleeting shadow of humor that quickly vanished. It's been a lot. Since my father passed, this workshop has felt like a mausoleum of memories. Every single item holds a story, a moment, a piece of him. And trying to decide what to keep, what to discard, it's overwhelming. It feels like I'm erasing him, bit by bit. Her voice trailed off, and she hugged her arms around herself, as if suddenly chilled despite the warmth of the summer day, a quiet, protective gesture. Callum nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. He remembered Lachlan speaking of his grandfather, Arthur Thorne, a renowned wood sculptor who had poured his very essence into his craft. The workshop was clearly his sanctuary, his cathedral of creativity, and now it stood as a poignant testament to his absence, a silent echo of a vibrant life. Where do you want to start? Callum asked, trying to inject some practical grounding energy into the somber atmosphere. Maybe we can just clear a path first, make some space, get some light in here. Alara looked at him then, truly looked at him, her honey-colored eyes, though still tinged with sorrow, holding an unexpected intensity that sent a strange, unfamiliar tremor through Callum's chest. For a moment, he felt completely seen, utterly exposed. A path? Yes, that sounds manageable, less daunting. She gestured vaguely towards a particularly dense area near the back wall, piled high with debris. Perhaps those old crates? They seemed to be full of nothing but wood scraps and broken tools, things that even Father wouldn't have kept. They began to work, a quiet, almost meditative rhythm quickly falling into place between them. Callum, with his youthful strength and boundless energy, lifted heavy boxes, shifted cumbersome planks, and moved piles of dusty lumber. Alara, despite her delicate appearance and the obvious weight of her grief, was surprisingly adept, her movements precise and deliberate as she carefully sifted through piles of tools, her fingers tracing the smooth, worn handles of chisels and planes. The hours passed in a quiet hum of activity, punctuated only by the rustle of moved objects and the soft thud of boxes being set down. The dust, disturbed from its long slumber, danced in glittering motes in the shafts of sunlight that now, thanks to their efforts, managed to penetrate the cleaned windows, illuminating the forgotten corners of the workshop. Callum found himself observing Alara out of the corner of his eye. She would occasionally pause, picking up a small, intricately carved wooden bird or a half-finished wooden bowl, her fingers tracing the smooth lines with a tenderness that spoke volumes of her connection to her father's work, to his very essence. A soft sigh, almost imperceptible, would escape her lips, a whisper of grief, a quiet lament that tugged at something deep inside Callum, a nascent empathy that surprised him. He realized then that this wasn't just about sorting through junk. It was about her processing a profound, deeply personal loss, piece by painful, nostalgic piece. Around midday, Alara straightened up, wincing slightly as she stretched her back, a small sigh of fatigue escaping her lips. "I think that's enough for now, Callum," she said, her voice a little hoarse from the dust and the quiet, emotional strain. "You've done so much already. Truly, I deeply appreciate it. Can I offer you some lunch? I've made some simple sandwiches, but I can make something more if you're still hungry." Callum's stomach rumbled in enthusiastic agreement, a surprisingly loud protest in the quiet space. He hadn't realized how hungry he was, how deeply the physical labor had depleted his reserves. "That would be great, Mrs. Thorne. Thank you." "Ilara, please," she corrected softly, her gaze meeting his, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth entering her eyes. "It's just Ilara. There's no need for formalities, not after you've helped me excavate my father's life." The simple correction, the direct address of his name, spoken with such quiet conviction, sent an unexpected ripple through him, a strange warmth that spread through his chest. He found himself nodding, a little too quickly, a slight flush rising to his cheeks. "Ilara," he repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate, almost forbidden on his tongue. They ate in the large, somewhat faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating more dancing motes of dust in the air. The sandwiches, simple yet artfully made, were delicious, and Ilara had prepared a pitcher of fresh, tart lemonade. The conversation flowed more easily now, away from the heavy, emotionally charged atmosphere of the workshop. She asked him about his studies, his plans after graduation, his family back in Orchard Hill. Callum found himself opening up, talking about his aspirations, his anxieties about the future, things he rarely shared with anyone other than Lachlan, and even then, often in fragmented sentences. Ilara listened intently, her honey eyes warm and empathetic, her chin resting thoughtfully on her hand. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions, simply a quiet, understanding presence that invited further confidences. "My father always believed in following your passion, no matter how unconventional, how impractical it might seem to others," she said, her voice a little wistful, a distant echo of shared memories. "He started this workshop when he was just a few years older than you, with nothing but a dream, a stubborn belief in his craft, and a few rudimentary hand tools. Everyone told him he was crazy, that he should get a real job, a secure profession. But he persevered. He sacrificed. And he created so much beauty, so much joy for others." She looked out the window, her gaze lost somewhere in the overgrown, sun-dappled garden, a faint, melancholic smile playing on her lips. "It's hard to imagine this place without him puttering around, humming off-key tunes, the comforting scent of sawdust perpetually filling the air." Callum watched her, a knot tightening in his chest. Her grief was palpable, a constant, silent companion she carried with an astonishing grace. "It sounds like he was a remarkable man," he said, genuinely, deeply moved by her quiet tribute. Ilara smiled, a genuine, sad smile that finally reached her eyes, softening their edges. "He was. And he would have liked you, Callum. He always admired young men with a good work ethic, a quiet determination and a kind heart. He would have seen something special in you." The compliment, so sincere and entirely unexpected, made Callum's cheeks flush even deeper. He mumbled a thank you, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through him, a quiet pride. They finished their lunch in companionable silence, the quiet punctuated only by the gentle clinking of cutlery against ceramic and the lazy buzzing of a fly against the kitchen windowpane. As the afternoon wore on, they returned to the workshop, their renewed energy making quick work of another section. Callum found himself enjoying the sheer physicality of the labor, the profound satisfaction of bringing order to such overwhelming chaos. He even discovered a hidden compartment in one of the dusty workbenches, cleverly concealed beneath a loose board. Inside, nestled amongst wood shavings and forgotten screws, was a collection of delicate, exquisitely hand-carved wooden animals, a tiny, inquisitive badger, a graceful deer, a plump, serene owl. Ilara gasped when he presented them to her, her eyes widening with a mixture of surprise and profound delight, a rare, unfiltered joy. These were his first pieces," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she carefully picked up the tiny, exquisitely detailed wooden owl, its eyes carved with such lifelike precision. "He carved these for me when I was a little girl, before he was even known. I thought they were lost forever, buried somewhere or thrown away years ago." A single, sparkling tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was a tear of quiet joy, a release, not sorrow. Thank you, Callum. Truly. You have no idea what this means to me. It's like finding a piece of him I thought was gone forever. Her gratitude was profound, radiating from her in waves, and Callum felt a surge of unexpected emotion, a quiet contentment at having brought her a moment of such clear, unadulterated peace. He simply nodded, unable to articulate the strange, deep satisfaction he felt. They continued working until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the workshop floor, painting the dust with hues of twilight. The air grew cooler, and a soft evening breeze rustled gently through the open door, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from the overgrown garden. "It's getting late," Alara said, her voice sounding tired but infused with a quiet contentment. "You've done more than I could have ever hoped for today. Please, let me drive you back to New Haven. It's too far to walk, especially with the sun setting, and your car, well, it looks like it needs some serious attention." It didn't sound too happy pulling in. She gestured towards his battered Honda with a sympathetic, almost knowing glance. Callum had completely forgotten about his car's sudden, dramatic demise. "Oh, right, yeah, it just quit on me the moment I pulled up. Dramatic exit." He felt a faint pang of embarrassment, a self-consciousness about his aging vehicle contrasting with her pristine one. "No, really, you don't have to. I can call a tow truck in the morning, or Lachlan can pick me up tomorrow if he's around." "Nonsense," Alara said, her tone firm but gentle, a subtle hint of authority in her voice. "It's no trouble at all, and it's the least I can do after you've saved my father's legacy from being entirely swallowed by dust bunnies. Besides," she added, a hint of playful mischief, a rare spark dancing in her eyes, "I wouldn't want Lachlan to think I'm not hospitable. He'd never let me hear the end of it." He couldn't argue with that. So, he agreed, and a few minutes later, he was settling into the passenger seat of Alara's immaculate, albeit slightly older, Volvo. The plush leather seats, the quiet hum of the engine, the subtle scent of something clean and elegant. It was a stark contrast to his own beat-up Civic, another subtle, unspoken reminder of their differing worlds, their differing stages of life. The drive back to New Haven was quiet at first, the rhythmic hum of the engine a soothing backdrop to the encroaching twilight. Alara navigated the winding country roads with practiced ease, her hands graceful on the steering wheel, her profile silhouetted against the deepening sky. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible above the engine's soft drone, a thread of vulnerability woven into her words. "You know, Callum, when my father first passed away, I felt like I was drowning. The grief was so consuming, a thick fog that enveloped everything. I couldn't see anything beyond it. And then there was all of this." She gestured vaguely towards the darkness surrounding the Briarcliff estate, towards the life they had just spent hours sifting through. His life's work, his memories. Every single item felt like another crushing weight, pulling me deeper into the abyss. She paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. "But today, with you here, it felt lighter. You brought a sense of calm, a quiet strength that I hadn't realized I was so desperately missing. And finding those carvings, it was like finding a piece of him I thought was gone forever. A piece of myself, too." Callum shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery, the fleeting glimpses of houses and trees. Her words were a raw, honest confession, laid bare in the confines of the car, and he felt a profound sense of responsibility, of something precious, something intensely personal being entrusted to him. He didn't know what to say, how to respond to such unvarnished vulnerability. He simply listened, his own heart stirring with an unfamiliar, deeply tender emotion. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken emotions, with the quiet understanding that had grown between them. As they pulled into his apartment complex, the Evergreen Residences, a cluster of modern, nondescript red brick buildings on Cedarwood Lane, Alara brought the car to a gentle, almost imperceptible stop. The yellow glow of the streetlights cast a soft light on her face, highlighting the faint lines of fatigue around her honey eyes, yet also illuminating a new, fragile serenity. "Thank you again, Ilara," Callum said, his voice a little rough as he reached for the door handle. "For everything. The lunch, the ride, and for letting me help. It meant a lot to me, too." She turned to him, her honey eyes meeting his in the dim light. There was a lingering moment, a charged silence that stretched between them, thick with an unnameable emotion. Her gaze seemed to probe, to search for something in his own eyes, a silent question. Callum felt a strange tightening in his chest, a flutter of nerves he couldn't explain, a dizzying sense of anticipation. He found himself unable to look away, caught in the quiet intensity of her gaze, held captive by a force he didn't understand. Then she leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, so soft he barely heard it over the gentle hum of the car's idle engine, a sound meant only for him. "Callum," she breathed, and the sound of his name on her lips, so intimate, so fragile, so laden with unspoken meaning, sent a sudden, electric jolt through him, a jolt that resonated deep within his bones, shaking him to his core. He felt a profound shift, an undeniable gravitational pull, a silent recognition that this was no longer just about helping a friend's mother. "You won't believe who took his side. This is just the start. It gets stronger." The whispered name, a delicate thread of sound, seemed to vibrate in the air between them, a tangible thing that thrummed with a strange, nascent energy. Callum's breath hitched, caught somewhere in his throat. He felt a sudden, inexplicable rush of heat to his face, a blush that burned beneath his skin. Her eyes, those warm, searching honey eyes, were still fixed on his, and in their depths he saw not just the lingering sorrow he had grown accustomed to, but something else entirely, a flicker of something raw, something yearning, something that spoke of profound loneliness and a desperate hope for connection. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, extinguished, replaced by a familiar sadness, a subtle, almost imperceptible withdrawal, as if she had caught herself. Ilara cleared her throat, a soft, nervous sound, and pulled back slightly in her seat, breaking the spell, re-establishing a safe, polite distance. "You're a good young man, Callum," she said, her voice now steady, though still softly modulated. "Lachlan is truly lucky to have a friend like you. You're a rare find." She offered a small, polite smile, the kind one offered to a distant acquaintance or a helpful stranger, a gesture meant to diffuse any lingering tension. The intimacy of the whispered name, the electric charge of that fleeting moment, was gone, swept away by a wave of proper, unbreachable distance. Callum felt a wave of confusion wash over him, followed by a faint, almost childlike pang of disappointment. What had that moment been? A figment of his overactive imagination? A trick of the dim streetlights and his own exhaustion? He chastised himself silently for overthinking it, for allowing his mind to wander into forbidden territory. She was Ilara, Lachlan's mother, a woman nearly twice his age, grieving her father. It was simply a moment of shared vulnerability, an outpouring of gratitude, nothing more. He tried to convince himself, to quell the restless energy that now pulsed beneath his skin, but the image of her face, her beautiful, sorrowful eyes, and the ghost of his name on her lips refused to be banished. The next morning, his old Honda Civic, stubbornly inanimate, sat in front of his apartment building like a defiant, wounded animal. After several frustrated attempts to coax it back to life, rattling its components and muttering under his breath, Callum admitted defeat. He called the Maplewood Auto Garage down on Clover Street, a reputable but notoriously slow local mechanic. They quoted him a price that made his eyes water and delivered the frustrating news that they wouldn't be able to look at it for at least 2 days, possibly 3, given their current workload. He sighed, contemplating his options. He had a major midterm project due, a complex thermodynamic analysis, and the university library on Campus Walk was his sanctuary for focused work, away from the distractions of his apartment. He couldn't just wait around for a tow truck and a leisurely repair. He was about to text Lachlan, grumbling about his automotive woes and asking for a ride, when his phone buzzed in his hand. It was an unknown number, a long-distance prefix. He almost didn't answer it, assuming it was a telemarketer. But something, an inexplicable premonition, compelled him to swipe across the screen. "Hello?" he said, his voice a little hoarse, still slightly raspy from concentration and a restless night. "Callum? It's Alara." Her voice, soft and hesitant, was instantly recognizable, sending a jolt of static electricity through him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to check in." A jolt went through him, immediate and visceral, like a low-voltage current. He straightened up in his desk chair, his heart suddenly thrumming against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat. His mind raced, a confusing mix of apprehension and a reluctant, thrilling eagerness. "No, not at all, Alara," he stammered, feeling foolishly tongue-tied. "I was just working on some problem sets, nothing urgent." "I apologize for calling so early," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh audible on the line, a breath of quiet worry. "But I need your help again. I know it's a big ask, and I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important. Lachlan mentioned your car was acting up yesterday, and I happened to be thinking of the workshop." He felt a strange, potent mix of apprehension and eagerness, a magnetic pull. "What is it? Is everything all right at Briarcliff?" he asked, concern etching his brow. "It's the workshop," she said, her voice now tinged with a new note of desperation, a tremor that made his stomach clench. "The roof. We had that heavy, unexpected downpour last night, a real storm, and there's a leak. A significant one. It's right over my father's main workbench, where he kept all his journals and his most delicate, irreplaceable tools. I tried to stem it with buckets and old rags, but it's too much, Callum. The old timber is soaked. I can hear it groaning, and I'm afraid it's going to collapse. I'm truly worried." Her voice trembled perceptibly, and Callum could practically hear the rising panic in it, the profound distress. "I don't know what to do, Callum. Lachlan is out of town for a conference until Tuesday, and I don't know anyone else who can help me with something like this, something so urgent. I'm alone here." His engineering mind immediately kicked into overdrive, shifting from abstract theories to practical, real-world problems. A leaking roof, especially in an old, timber-framed structure like the workshop, could lead to serious, irreversible structural damage, jeopardizing her father's legacy, her memories. "I'll be right there, Alara," he said without hesitation, his voice firm, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. "Give me 15 minutes. I'll grab some tarps and a few basic tools. Don't worry, we'll fix it. We have to." He hung up and was out the door in minutes, grabbing a large, heavy-duty tarp he kept in his trunk for emergencies, along with a powerful LED flashlight and a small, well-stocked toolkit he used for minor repairs. The drive to Briarcliff Estate was faster this time, his mind racing with possibilities, with solutions, with the urgency of the situation. The night was dark, a thick, oppressive blanket of clouds obscuring the moon and stars, deepening the sense of isolation. As he drove up the long, winding gravel driveway, the old house loomed, a dark, imposing silhouette against the inky sky, its windows like vacant eyes. He pulled up to the side entrance where the workshop was, and saw a faint, flickering light glowing from within, a beacon in the darkness. He rushed to the door, pushing it open with a familiar creak. The air inside was heavy with the smell of damp wood, decaying plaster, and the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil. Alara stood in the middle of the workshop, illuminated by a single weak lantern, its feeble glow casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the urgency of the situation. Her hair was disheveled, a few damp strands clinging to her forehead, and her face was pale, streaked with what looked like dust, mud, and raw despair. Water dripped steadily, relentlessly from a gaping hole in the ceiling, splashing into a haphazard collection of buckets that were already overflowing, their contents spilling onto the worn wooden floor. A dark, rapidly expanding stain spread across the main workbench, perilously close to a stack of leather-bound journals and a tray of delicate carving tools, her father's most cherished possessions. "Oh, Callum, thank goodness you're here," she whispered, her voice choked with profound relief, thick with the remnants of barely suppressed panic. Her eyes, wide and distressed, immediately met his, clinging to his gaze as if he were a lifeline. In their depths, he saw not just fear, but a profound, almost shattering vulnerability that made his heart ache, tightening in his chest. "It's okay, Alara," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel, but knew she needed to hear. "We'll get this. Where's the access to the roof? Do you have a ladder? Or an attic access point?" She pointed a trembling hand towards a narrow, creaking staircase tucked away in the far corner of the workshop, barely visible in the dim light. "Up there. It leads to a small attic space, and then a hatch to the roof. Be careful, Callum. It's old. Very old. And probably slippery." Callum quickly ascended the rickety, groaning stairs, the ancient wood protesting under his weight. The attic was a dusty, claustrophobic space, filled with forgotten furniture draped in white, ghost-like sheets, each piece a silent sentinel of time. He found the hatch, a heavy wooden square that appeared to have been undisturbed for decades, and with a grunt of effort pushed it open, revealing a sliver of the dark, stormy sky. A powerful gust of wind immediately swept through the opening, bringing with it the bracing scent of rain and wet earth, chilling him to the bone. He climbed out onto the roof, the cold, damp air immediately raising goosebumps on his skin. The rain had paused, a temporary reprieve, but the heavy threat of more hung oppressive in the atmosphere, a palpable presence. The roof was steep and treacherous, covered in slippery moss and loose, crumbling shingles. He carefully made his way towards the source of the leak, his powerful flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, searching for the telltale signs of damage. He found a section of missing shingles, a gaping wound in the roof's surface, exposing the old, rotting timber beneath. Water had clearly been seeping through for some time, exacerbated by last night's torrential downpour. He unfolded the large, cumbersome tarp, wrestling with its vast expanse in the persistent wind, and painstakingly covered the damaged section, carefully positioning it to direct the water flow away from the gaping hole. He secured it as best he could with some old, heavy bricks he found lying nearby, remnants of a forgotten repair. It wasn't a permanent fix, merely a desperate temporary measure, but it would hold until morning, until a professional roofer could come and assess the true extent of the damage. He climbed back down into the workshop, feeling a rush of satisfaction mixed with profound exhaustion, his muscles aching from the exertion. Alara was still standing there, exactly where he had left her, watching him, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her, her face etched with anxiety. Is it all right?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a thread of hope woven into her words. "It'll hold," he confirmed, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, his breath still ragged. "It's a temporary fix, Alara, just to stop the immediate damage. You'll definitely need a roofer to come out and properly repair it as soon as possible. Tomorrow, hopefully." A visible wave of profound relief washed over her face, and her shoulders visibly slumped, releasing a burden she had been carrying alone. "Oh, Callum, thank you. Thank you so much. I honestly don't know what I would have done without you. I was so scared, seeing all of his things getting ruined, his journals getting wet. It felt like I was failing him." She gestured towards the workbench, the dark, wet patch now contained beneath the makeshift tarp. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, trying to calm her palpable distress. "It's what friends are for, Alara. Don't worry." The words felt hollow the moment they left his lips, a strange, uncomfortable echo in the vast silence of the workshop. Friends. Was that truly all they were? The thought lingered, an uncomfortable buzz beneath his skin, unsettling the fragile peace he had felt. She was still staring at him, her eyes brimming with a depth of gratitude that transcended mere politeness, a vulnerability that made his heart clench. The air between them was thick with unspoken emotion, the only sound the steady, rhythmic drip of water into the buckets, now greatly reduced, a comforting counterpoint to the quiet tension. "You must be freezing," she said, finally breaking the silence, her gaze lingering on his damp clothes. "And you're soaked. Please, come inside. I'll make you a hot cup of tea, or coffee, something to warm you up and dry you out." He didn't argue. He was indeed cold, his clothes clinging uncomfortably to his skin, and the idea of warmth, of being inside with her, away from the damp and the shadows, was inexplicably appealing, a magnetic draw. They walked into the house, the vast echoing silence of the main hall swallowing their footsteps, the sound of the rain still a distant muffled hum. Ilara led him to the kitchen, which felt much smaller, cozier than the grand empty hall, a sanctuary of warmth and light. She moved with quiet efficiency, putting the kettle on, its soft whistle soon filling the room. Callum stood awkwardly by the door, feeling the lingering chill seep into his bones. "You can take off your wet jacket, Callum," she said, her back to him as she reached for mugs, her voice gentle, understanding. "And there's a towel on the back of that chair, by the window." He gratefully peeled off his damp jacket, the cold fabric clinging to his skin, and draped it over the back of a chair near the warmth of the stove. He dried his hands and face with the soft, fluffy towel, feeling the last vestiges of the night's chill begin to dissipate, a welcome warmth spreading through him. Ilara poured 2 steaming mugs of tea, her back still to him, her movements precise. The rich, comforting aroma of Earl Grey filled the kitchen, warm and inviting. "Here," she said, turning and handing him a mug. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, a brief electric contact that sent a jolt of static electricity, not just through his hand but through his entire being. He met her gaze, and again that charged silence descended, thick with unsaid things, with a deepening, unspoken awareness. Her eyes were still full of gratitude, but beneath it he saw something else, something he couldn't quite name, yet felt deeply. A vulnerability, a silent plea, a flickering question. They sat at the large, worn wooden kitchen table, the only light coming from a single overhead fixture, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The rain began to fall again outside, a gentle rhythmic drumming against the window panes, creating a secluded, intimate bubble around them. The silence stretched between them, no longer awkward, but deeply comfortable, yet intensely aware, charged with an almost palpable energy. Ilara took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her gaze drifting to the window, lost in thought. "It's been so long since I've had someone here, someone to help," she murmured, her voice soft, almost lost in the steady sound of the rain. "Lachlan tries, bless him, but he's so busy with his studies, with his own life, and since my father, it's just been me. In this big, empty house, echoing with memories." She sighed, a deep, weary sound that carried the weight of years. "It can be very lonely, Callum, more than you can imagine." Callum felt a wave of profound empathy wash over him, a familiar ache for a loneliness he understood. He had moments of it himself, despite his friends and his bustling city life, moments when the sheer weight of being an individual felt isolating. He looked at her, truly seeing her, not just as Lachlan's mother, but as a woman carrying a heavy burden, a woman who had been alone for too long, her spirit perhaps bruised but not broken. He saw the fragile beauty, the quiet strength that had been tested by grief, by time, by solitude. And in that moment, the barriers, the unspoken rules of their relationship, the careful social constructs, began to feel thin, fragile, ready to crumble. "I'm sorry, Ilara," he said, his voice surprisingly deep. a low rumble that felt foreign even to his own ears. No one should have to feel that alone. She turned to him then, her eyes searching his, delving deep into his gaze. The gratitude was still there, but now, mixed with it, was something else entirely. A quiet desperation, a raw, aching vulnerability that seemed to crack the elegant, composed facade she usually presented to the world. She reached across the table, her hand hovering for a moment, suspended in the charged air, then settling gently, tentatively, on his. Her fingers were cool, almost cold, against his warm skin. A shock went through him, immediate and profound, a jolt that rippled through his entire body. It wasn't a flirtatious touch, not overtly sexual, but a gesture of profound need, of human connection, of seeking solace. Her thumb stroked the back of his hand, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough to send a shiver, a delicious tremor down his spine, awakening something dormant within him. Her gaze was locked with his, unwavering, and in her eyes he saw a silent confession, a profound surrender to something she had been fighting, something she had buried for too long. He could feel her trembling, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor running through her hand, mirroring the tremor in his own heart. The rain outside intensified, drumming a frantic, insistent rhythm against the glass, amplifying the quiet intensity within the kitchen. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, thick with unspoken desires, with years of suppressed loneliness, with a desperate longing for connection that stretched across the divide of age and circumstance. Alara's breath hitched, a faint gasp, and her gaze dropped to their joined hands, her fingers tightening their grip on his. She didn't speak, didn't have to. The pressure of her hand on his, the unspoken vulnerability in her eyes, the gentle caress of her thumb, they said everything. Callum felt a strange, dizzying sensation, as if the world had tilted violently on its axis, as if gravity itself had shifted. All the unspoken rules, all the reasons why this was wrong, why it was impossible, dissolved in the face of her quiet desperation, her fragile, undeniable touch. He didn't pull away. He couldn't. He simply watched her, his own heart pounding a frantic, joyful rhythm against his ribs, a silent counterpoint to the drumming rain. He knew, in that profound, silent moment, that nothing would ever be the same. What happens now, no one expected, but it's what restores fairness. The rain outside hammered against the kitchen window with a furious, relentless drumbeat, a wild, visceral accompaniment to the frantic, joyous rhythm of Callum's heart. Alara's hand remained intertwined with his, a fragile, trembling anchor in a world that had suddenly, inexplicably, tilted on its axis. Her thumb continued its slow, feather-light caress across the back of his hand, a movement that was both tentative and infinitely expressive, a silent language understood only between them. He could feel the surprising warmth radiating from her palm, the slight tremor in her fingers, and it resonated deep within him, pulling at something he hadn't known was so profoundly untethered, so desperately in need of mooring. Her gaze, when it finally lifted from their joined hands, was raw, vulnerable, stripped bare of all the polite defenses, all the carefully constructed facades she usually wore. "Callum," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the insistent clamor of the rain, a breathy, fragile sound that was both a plea and a silent confession. The sound of his name, uttered in that intimate, almost broken tone, was an electric current that ran through him, from his fingertips to his very core, igniting something elemental. He saw the profound conflict warring in her eyes, the years of ingrained propriety, the rigid societal expectations, the phantom presence of her late father, the unspoken loyalty to Lachlan, all battling against a profound, desperate loneliness, an aching, silent yearning for connection that had finally breached its carefully constructed walls. He didn't respond with words. Words felt inadequate, clumsy. incapable of capturing the immense, complex tapestry of emotions that had unfurled between them. Instead, driven by an instinct he hadn't known he possessed, an overwhelming surge of empathy, and a burgeoning, undeniable attraction that pulsed through his veins, he slowly, deliberately turned his hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. Her hand, so delicate, so surprisingly fragile, felt perfectly natural nestled in his, a perfect fit. Her eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of surprise. Then something else, a deep, almost painful relief, a release of tension he could almost feel. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips, a sound of profound surrender, of a burden lifted. The silence that followed was thick, dense with unspoken emotions, with the silent weight of choices being made without a single verbal declaration. The air in the kitchen crackled with a tension that was both agonizing and exhilarating, a palpable electricity. The invisible barriers that had always existed between them, the chasm of age, his deep-seated friendship with Lachlan, her sacred status as his mother, dissolved in that single, shared moment of touch, of acknowledgement. It was a silent, powerful admission of a shared vulnerability, a recognition of a deep, aching need for human connection that transcended all logic, all reason, all societal decree. He felt her pull back slightly, almost imperceptibly, a fleeting moment of hesitation, a last, desperate internal battle, a silent inquiry into the abyss she was about to step into. Her gaze flickered to the door, then back to his eyes, as if searching for a sign, a permission he hadn't explicitly given, but which his stillness, his unwavering gaze, clearly offered. But then, with a profound, shuddering exhalation, she leaned further across the table, her head tilting slightly, a silent invitation. The scent of her, subtle and sweet, like old roses and something earthy and rain-kissed, filled his senses, intoxicating him. I shouldn't, she murmured, her voice thin, almost breaking, a mere thread of sound. But her hand remained intertwined with his, a paradox of words and action. Her eyes, however, held a fierce, desperate light that contradicted her spoken words. It was a whisper of defiance against the very strictures she articulated, a battle raging within her. This isn't right. You're Lachlan's friend. You're so young. I'm too old for this. His thumb, of its own volition, began to trace the delicate, almost translucent lines on the back of her hand, a soft, soothing gesture that seemed to calm the frantic beating of his own heart. He saw the conflicting emotions warring on her beautiful face, the raw pain of loneliness, the deep longing, the desperate fear of rejection, of further pain. He didn't want to argue with her words, didn't want to diminish the very real obstacles that stood between them, the societal chasm. But he also knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he wouldn't pull away. Not now. Not when she was this vulnerable, this exposed. Sometimes, he said, his voice surprisingly steady, a low rumble that seemed to fill the quiet kitchen, enveloping her in its warmth. The right thing isn't always the easy thing. And sometimes, what feels wrong on the surface, what logic dictates is impossible, is exactly what you need. What you deserve. His gaze held hers, unwavering, conveying all the unspoken understanding he felt, all the empathy that had blossomed between them. He saw the surprise in her eyes, then a flicker of something akin to fragile hope, undeniable and breathtaking. Her grip on his hand tightened almost imperceptibly, a desperate plea in its pressure. She searched his eyes, a profound depth of emotion swirling in hers, a silent question of destiny. The rain outside intensified its drumming, creating a heavy, intimate cocoon around them, shutting out the rest of the world. He saw the fear in her eyes, the years of pain and loneliness she carried, and the sudden, terrifying hope that flickered to life, illuminating her features. He knew instinctively that this was not about fleeting desire, not about mere physical attraction, but about something far deeper, far more profound. It was about two souls, adrift in their own solitudes, finding an unexpected harbor, a quiet, unexpected refuge in each other's presence. Alara's breath hitched again, a faint, almost inaudible gasp, and her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, to articulate the immense, confusing tangle of emotions that held her captive. But no words came. Instead, slowly, agonizingly slowly, as if moving through thick honey, she leaned further across the table, her gaze never leaving his, a silent conversation passing between their eyes. Her body language was a profound confession, a silent surrender to the irresistible, undeniable pull that had grown between them, a force stronger than any external barrier. He mirrored her movement, leaning in, drawn by an invisible, unbreakable thread, unable to resist. Their faces were inches apart, close enough to feel the soft warmth of her breath on his skin, to see the faint, nervous tremor in her eyelashes, to feel the silent intensity of her gaze. And then she closed the distance, her lips soft and hesitant, brushing against his. It was a tentative kiss, a question more than a statement, filled with a delicate trepidation, a profound vulnerability, and a desperate, aching yearning. Callum responded instinctively, his own lips pressing gently, reassuringly against hers, a silent affirmation, a promise. The kiss deepened, slowly, exquisitely, a soft exploration, a shared sigh of relief that seemed to emanate from their very souls. It was a kiss born of loneliness, of unspoken understanding, of shared pain, of a quiet, unexpected connection forged in the dust of a forgotten workshop and the vulnerable intimacy of a rainy night. He tasted the faint sweetness of tea on her lips, and the subtle, earthy scent of rain clung to her hair, enveloping him in her presence. Her hand, still intertwined with his, tightened, her fingers gripping his with a desperate strength that belied her delicate appearance, a silent anchor in a storm of emotion. He felt a profound sense of coming home, a quiet comfort, a deep peace he hadn't realized he'd been searching for, a solace he had yearned for without knowing it. The world outside, with its driving rain and its rigid societal expectations, faded into a distant, muffled hum, irrelevant. There was only the warmth of her lips, the soft sigh against his, the gentle tremor of her hand in his, a perfect, fragile symphony of unspoken connection. When they finally broke apart, it was only by inches, their faces still impossibly close. Their foreheads rested against each other, their breaths mingling in the quiet space between them, a shared breath. Her eyes were still closed, and a faint flush, a delicate rose had risen to her cheeks, a mark of her vulnerability. Callum's own heart hammered in his chest, a joyous, terrifying rhythm that echoed in his ears. He opened his eyes slowly, looking down at her, seeing the profound vulnerability etched on her face, the fragile beauty that had captivated him. Alara opened her eyes then, slowly,